So that inner critic voice, it took me a long time to unravel it. And I didn't have these skills when I was a mum. And that's why I feel really passionate about it now, because I really needed them. What's interesting is, of course, they are all experiencing the same root issue. Their behaviors are showing up differently, but the core pain is there. And that pain is that inner critical voice that says, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real-life stories. If you're a new mum and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
Welcome, Kathryn, to the Motherhood Clinic podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. The reason I thought it would be great to chat to you, and I'll allow you to give yourself a brief introduction after this. But you're a self-compassion coach, and I'd love for you to tell us a bit more about what that actually is. But the relevance to our audience who are new mothers is, I think everyone can identify with that mum guilt or the parent guilt or the inner voice that tells you like you're not good enough. And I think everyone goes through that, not necessarily just for motherhood or for parenthood, but in any walk of life. And I think this conversation and the work that you guys are doing, which I think is fantastic, is so relevant to anyone going through any kind of hardship and how to deal with yourself in a more self-compassionate way. So I'll stop there and allow you to give you like the overview of what you do. And then I'll talk a bit more about what the conversation for today looks like. So over to you, Kathryn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. When I found out what you did,
Yeah.
I will talk about it later, but the history in my heart, what you're doing is really, really important. And that's why I'm here. It's been a very long road. The short version is I grew up in a critical environment, and home, school, church, everywhere, I received criticism. And some people would say, you're oversensitive. And what I've discovered over time is that this external influence can be internalized really, really quickly, especially if you're sensitive. And that's what I did. So my work has spanned a long adventure journey on supporting children and young people, adults, teachers, professionals to understand what's going on inside their head and to connect with their heart. So that inner critic voice, it took me a long time to unravel it. And I didn't have these skills when I was a mum. And that's why I feel really passionate about it now, because I really needed them. I recognized the suffering in my students. I was a secondary school teacher for a long time. And it didn't matter whether I was in a high achieving school in Surrey, teaching these girls that were really mean to themselves, but their behaviors showed up as self-harm and eating disorders and things like that. The other end of the spectrum, I was working in failing school in inner city London, and the boys were sniffing glue, aggressive behavior, graffitiing, etc. What's interesting is, of course, they are all experiencing the same root issue. Their behaviors are showing up differently, but the core pain is there. And that pain is that inner critical voice that says, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything, whether you're an A grade student or an F grade student.
Right.
And when it comes to motherhood, we we don't talk about this. We don't I didn't think about it. It's, oh, I'm so happy I'm going to have a baby. This is so magical. There's so much love and joy. I'm so excited, in between throwing up, obviously, when I was pregnant. But no one talked to me about what would happen to that inner critic. And for me, it amplified. It got louder and louder. The more I, bumped into different motherhood challenges. And that's what we're here to talk about. So it's been a long journey. I've worked with a whole range of different needs, different people. And everyone needs this. But I feel particularly passionate about our children and young people. So if we can help our mums and dads, of course, dads are listening, but if we can help really establish a more compassionate response to ourselves when things are difficult, and they are difficult when you're a parent. Some people, have some ease, like a sleeping baby for a start, and some people don't. But if we can really establish that, then mums and dads can then model this for their kids, and you're on a whole new trajectory to cope with life's challenges.
Great. Thank you, Kathryn. And I think that's the point I would take from this is, the work that you do at the Kind Mind Academy is obviously looking at to support children in their dealing with their inner voice. But this conversation is as equally applicable, as you're saying, to mothers. And I think the conversation we're going to have today, there's going to be two parts to this conversation. So this first discussion will be about understanding that inner critic or that inner voice. And we'll talk a bit about the different elements that go through that and the mindset to understand that thing, person, whatever you want to call it. And then the second conversation that we'll have after this will be more about how to practice what we talk about as behavioral self-compassion. So how do we address that problem, and what are some solutions that people can take away from that? So let's jump into today. We'll talk a bit about who and what that inner critic is, or inner voice. What happens when it takes charge, and kind of like it very automatically and unintentionally takes charge, and we often find ourselves in a bit of a mess. And then lastly, how do we understand that critic or that inner voice so that we can regain control or regain and take charge for ourselves, right? So that we're not being led by this thing. So that's going to be the journey for today. Let's jump into that first conversation. So who and what is this inner critic? We talk about it as different things. It's called the chimp brain. Sometimes we refer to the gremlin, the inner voice. I think you have a name for it, right? Like that you talk about. But talk to me a bit about what that inner critic
Let me
is.
introduce you.
Yeah. Excellent.
This is Crusher. So Crusher is the character that I created from my first book, The Voices in My Head, or my first children's book, I should say. Right. So Crusher's your main voice, that inner critic. We'll come to Booster later. And Crusher is that voice that, interestingly, is trying to keep you safe. But on the surface, has no skill, no ability to communicate that care in any other language other than meanness. So it's going straight for that negativity bias. It's part of the brain we are hardwired for negativity, hardwired for survival, not for happiness. This primitive brain is still running the show. Now, this is a good thing. It's different now. We don't have saber-toothed tigers chasing us. We have hundreds of emails, and it's more, I think, a lot more to do with our self-concept that's being attacked on a regular basis. What type of mum are you? What do you mean your child doesn't sleep? Oh, does your baby still use a dummy? I mean, there's so many influences about right and wrong parenting. There are dinosaurs, there are saber-toothed tigers. That's the threat. We have different types of threat. So Crusher is that threatening voice, that responding to that threat. So don't go out, you mustn't go out. If you go out, they may see that your baby's not got the perfect outfit on. not got matching socks on. I mean, it can be that innocuous and crazy, but this inner critic is that constant narrative that will run in the background. Now, I've had clients come to me and say, "Oh, I'm interested in the mindfulness bit. Yeah, I'd like to come to your course, but I don't need the self-compassion. And I don't have any problems with that." It's like, okay, let's see. Absolutely no problem. But what happened was this particular lady I'm thinking about, it was so automatic, as automatic negative thoughts, those ants, that she didn't notice it. It's like having the radio on in the background, and it's always radio negative, radio crusher. You're useless at that. You're so useless. How many people do you see as, oh, useless, silly idiot? Oh, wouldn't. And that's certainly in Western culture, it's just the norm. It's a throwaway. We don't pay attention to it. But actually, that's affecting our physiology. It's affecting our whole body and our neurology when we constantly criticize ourselves. And the science is demonstrating that when we are really critical all the time to ourselves, when we've internalized perhaps external criticism, or when we've maybe even got both, but that internal voice that says you're rubbish, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything, you're not enough, that will generate the same physiological response as if you are being physically attacked. And when I found that out, I thought, enough. Enough is enough. I need to change this. I need to take charge of what's happening in my brain and how do I do that, which is I went on the journey to find, self-compassion.
That's great, Kathryn. And I think I imagine everyone can identify with a level of self-criticism. I wanted to explore. I think it's important that you mentioned that there's a role that plays, which is it's a positive and negative, but there's a constructive and destructive. So there's a constructive voice that says that pushes you. You know, that somewhat a healthy element of self-criticism pushes you to do better. And I've been in that situation where I'm like, okay, you can do better than this, and that's a good thing. As you're saying, it's not a good or a bad. It's more about how you interpret that, because something to push you to achieve more, or to say, hey, look, watch out for this, or there is real danger. That's why that voice exists. As you said, it's to protect you. But there's a point in that scale where that constructive voice then becomes destructive because it's too much. And can you give any advice or guidance? Because everyone's resilience levels will be different, right? Someone can, I mean, it's very hard to be objective about what your tolerance level is. Some people might have a high tolerance for this and some might have a low. But the point is, how do you recognize when that's becoming, whatever tolerance level you have, when that's becoming destructive as opposed to constructive? What are some of the signs? What are some of the indicators that people should be watching out for?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. There's one thing I
Yeah.
really need to address before we dive into that.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is all the science demonstrates that we are more motivated when we are kind to ourselves rather than the stick. So crushers the stick.
Yeah.
Crushers say, come on, you can do better than that. The
Yeah.
intention is still good. But there's an interesting nuance. So we've got two aspects of self-compassion, and then they can divide again. But we've got a tender response to ourselves. Maybe, we've just lost a family member. Oof, this is really hard. We've also got the fierce self-compassion. And the fierce self-compassion is more of that inner coach.
Right.
Hey, Patrick, come on now. You
Yes.
know that you can pull this out the bag. Don't buy that story that you're not a good enough. So there's a subtle nuance there, and it's taken me a while to really start to understand, hear the difference.
That's important. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
It's very, very powerful, because people think self-compassion is all soft and fluffy and the inner critic's all mean. It's actually not. As you said, the inner critic is there to keep you safe and can be that motivator. Don't be an idiot. What do you want to go behind the bike sheds for and smoke that cigarette? So that can be very, very helpful. Oh, they don't want you there anyway, just
Yeah.
whatever it is. So that can be very, very helpful, very protective.
Yes.
But if it becomes chronic and, as you say, destructive, then we really need to address it. That's where the antidote of self-compassion comes in. So just to understand that there is a very strong protective, motivating part of self-compassion, but they are slightly different. And the motivation, the intention is to be kind. So I am approaching healthy eating really differently in the beginning of this year. I'm motivated through self-care, not through you just need to lose weight. You're just such a fat slob. Will you get on those, the treadmill? Can you hear? So it's about tone. It's about, that intention behind that motivation. So
Good. That's an important point. I'm glad you pulled out that it's a significant nuance to take. And I think, you talk a lot about language and the impact that has on behavior. So for people listening in, what are some of the signs? Because it's very, I was saying, it takes you a while to kind of tease out those voices, like the protector versus the fierce self-compassionate. How do people discern that? What are some of the things what are some of the watch outs that, you're listening too much to that crusher voice?
we're going to keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it as much as possible.
The simplest way to recognize it is a question.
Okay.
Would I say that to my best friend?
Mm-hmm.
Would I have that attitude with someone I love? Would I speak to them in that tone? Now, as soon as you start looking, this was one that I used to play with a lot when I first started to shine a light on my inner voice. Would I say that out loud? Would I want my colleagues to hear that? And most importantly, would I want my children to know that's what I'm saying? Would I want them to hear that? Stupid cow, you're no good at anything. That's my polite version.
Okay.
What?
Yeah.
That's my polite version. What would that teach? You've got a friend who's struggling. She's a new mum. She hasn't had any sleep for months.
Yeah.
And she's sitting there with you on the sofa, just saying, I'm rubbish. I can't do this. I just can't do this. Oh my God. And she's absolutely in a pickle. How would you respond to her?
Yeah.
Would you say, come on, you lazy cow, get up, stop being a whinger, get dressed? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Who cares if you haven't had any sleep?
Yeah.
Get outside and go and do the washing up.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that to someone that was really struggling and suffering in that way. Our instinct is caregiving. We are mammals. We have a caregiving system. We have a mammalian caregiving system, which we use naturally for our babies. Oh, baby, sweetheart, it's all right.
Yeah.
Our tone is different. We're gentle. We're soothing. So if we know that, then we can see its absolute opposite. And the absolute opposite is that inner critic. It is that critical voice. So if you can hear the voice that says, oh, stop moaning, just isn't kind. Is it kind? Would you say that to a friend? Look at your tone and attitude. I mean, I was rude, just constantly rude to myself. I was the most lovely person on the outside. And I was totally out of balance. I was mean to myself. I had such high expectations of myself. There's another big clue.
Yeah.
Your expectations are really high. If perfection is the only thing that's good enough, there'll be an inner critic running the show.
Yeah. I think there's some really good points that I'd love to come back to that you've mentioned there, Kathryn. And I love those questions that you put out there. And the reason I like it is because they're so personal to you. So when you say, would I say that to myself, or would I say that to my best friend? Yeah, maybe I might say something to my best friend that he might not like, but I would say that because the intent is good and he knows me as my best friend. So that's when that voice is acceptable.
That
but
would
equally,
be fierce self-compassion. That would be fierce compassion.
Exactly that, right? And I think what's good about those questions is that it identifies your personal values and your personal tone. You know, your voice will be different to my voice. Your fierce or self-compassion might be different to mine. So it's identifying what is right for you, which will be unique to everybody, right? Which I really like. I forget my second point, but there's something else you mentioned. But I just think that's
All right.
an important. That's why I think those questions are really valuable, because it's not like there isn't a way that suits everybody. What you're
No.
demonstrating is a principle that people can then work out for themselves, and it is as it's a bit of work and a journey for yourself to figure out what that tone and voice sounds like. I say the second point was around perfection and around expectations, which I think is a broader topic we can come on to. But certainly, again, it's that constructive versus destructive. Again, people with high expectations. I think I've certainly been at that at some point where, again, it could be constructive because it's good to have a high bar in many respects, because you do want to do the best for you and for your baby and in whatever endeavor you're going for. And it's very difficult, I think, to then understand when that becomes too high a bar. And I think I found it incredibly difficult, if anything, impossible to understand when people say, "Oh, you're setting yourself too high a bar." And I was like, "Well, that's just my bar. Like, that I can't be objective as to when that's too high." And it was
Yeah.
only someone else that could look in and say, "Why are you beating yourself up so much?" I was like, "I'm not beating myself. I've got a high bar. What's wrong with that?" And I that was I still struggle with that, frankly, because the question you ask yourself is, why is it bad to have a high bar? And so it's a very it's a hard it's a hard thing to navigate, isn't it? So I think it's just wanted to come back to the expectations and how you treat that voice.
It takes a lot of investigation. This is a slow burn. This is not a quick fix. Oh, I'm kind to myself now. I
Mm,
won't have any mean voice in my head. No, no, that
yeah.
mean voice will come every time you get invited out to the baby group. It's like, oh, you know, what do I look like? I look like I've just come through a bush. And I could pretty much guarantee my first son I'd get him all dressed up, looking smart. I'd be like, yes, hooray. And he would have a little tummy explosion and it would go everywhere just as we were leaving the house. And then
Lovely.
I'd be late. I hate being late. That's a clear expectation for me. I like to be on time, and so on and so forth. So we're always going to bump into a critical voice, a judgments. What
Yes.
we need is to understand that all the research demonstrates that the kinder we are. So let's start at the beginning to reassure everyone that's listening that might be going, oh my goodness. Um, in Western society, this has been done, in the States particularly. Um, just over three quarters of the population, 78% of the population are significantly kinder to others than they are
Mm,
themselves. So let's start with that bar, recognizing that.
hmm.
When we know that straight away, we can say, well, I'm quite likely to be in that three quarters, quite
Mm,
likely, because my expectations are high for me. Now, they often can be projected outwardly, but
hmm.
they're high. What we have discovered, all the science demonstrates, is that actually that motivator, that stick that people, especially I've been, worked with top scientists in Australia and things. It's like, I need the stick. I need the stick. I need to keep going. Otherwise, I'm not going to get out of bed. Actually, when we practice, something changes. And actually,
Hmm.
we have far more sustainable energy. We're more likely to get back up after failure. We're more likely to respond to conflict healthily. So
Mm,
this this expectation we have of ourselves, this inner critic, this driver, actually is harmful. It
yeah.
is physiologically, chemically not serving us.
Hmm.
We can have, it's, if we bring it on a parallel with stress, we know short-term intensive, woohoo, oh, I'm doing an interview. There'll be a level, an acute level of stress coming up because we want to do a good job. That's great. The body's hardwired to handle that.
Mm,
it's not hardwired to handle chronic stress.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this is really where the critical voice, this is where Crusher really steps into its own world of destruction. Little and often of that voice saying, "Oh, you're rubbish. You can't do this. Oh my gosh, look at the state of the baby. Oh my, you should.
Mm.
How did you not see that there's spittle all down the baby's top, etc." Whatever it is. I
Yeah.
found breastfeeding really, really hard. And
Mm.
the noise. Oh, you're not a natural mother. You're no good at this. Your body can't even feed your baby. It
Mm.
went on and on and on and on. Because I had an expectation that I would be a good earth mother and I'd be groovy and and it didn't happen. I didn't get the ideal. I got a baby that screamed all night, every night for years. We couldn't work out why. He probably had a very bad headache. He had a tough birth. But can you see how straight away it's a cycle and a chronic thing
Yeah.
that you may not notice it. This is about looking and to being explicitly kind to oneself when things are difficult. We have to catch it first. That's the first step. Oh my gosh. And I remember vividly the first time after my training, the first time I was coming down the stairs and I heard it. I heard it loud and clear because normally it's just that radio station in the background telling me I'm
Yeah.
rubbish.
Yeah.
And then it was really, I don't know, I said something rude. It had expletives in, I'm sure. And I stopped on the stairs, which is why I have such a visceral memory of it. I stopped. I laughed out loud and said, "Kathryn, would you say that out loud?" And
Yeah.
that was the beginning of me starting to recognize, wow, this mean voice is
Yeah.
all the time. It's in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The analogy of the radio chatter is so helpful as an analogy, because you're right, it is always in the background. What is that like? When you're blind to a smell, like you just get used to it because it's always
Mm,
there.
mm,
But I think the chronic distinction, I think, is important, because it is that everyday erosion. There's small little bits
yes.
in and of itself seem pretty innocuous, right? But I think it's the duration and then the intensity that perpetuates. Now, if we kind of shift, I think, because part of what you touched upon is going, I think, into that kind of that bucket of how do we then understand that inner voice and that critic so that we can start to regain, take charge, take control again of the situation, so that we're not being led by this voice. And you talk a lot about, obviously, self-compassion. We'll talk about acceptance and what does it mean to surrender to that situation. These are things that I think we've talked with previous guests a lot about. One thing that I've personally come to appreciate is when I used to hear that voice in other respects, it was I would see it as, there's a book called Taming Your Gremlin, and we talked about this yesterday or the other day, and it was often you treat it as something you want to kind of cast out. So I'll be like, oh, who the hell is this guy turning up today? Like, I don't want no one wants to feel like that. And so you want to effectively just reject that voice and just cast it out, right? And I think the mindset shift was, and as you talked about, is understanding that as like the inner child. And actually, Crusher is not someone to be thrown out, because it serves it's actually someone to be embraced. So I'd love to talk a bit about that shift. And I think that kind of takes us into that kind of that third discussion point around really how do you, what is the mindset shift to embrace that voice, as opposed to think like, oh, I need to purge this terrible
Mm,
negative bias in
mm.
me. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, that it's such a big one, Patrick.
Yeah.
When I first learned this, when I was seeking to be better, to be happy, to
Yeah.
get rid of this hideous voice, that's all I want. It's like, just please help me. I want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get rid of this because it was vicious all the time. And this is way into my adulthood. And it's a very natural. I just want to acknowledge it's very natural to think, yucky thing, let's get rid of it.
Mm.
The shift when we're invited to consider, oh, how might this voice be helping you? Like, it's not helping me. It's horrible and it's rude all the time. Can we look under the hood? Can we actually be curious? So part of a mindful approach is curiosity rather than judgment. Can I be
Yes.
curious? Not know the answer, but just take a look. And then we discover, oh, maybe this voice is actually trying to keep us safe.
Mm.
Well, that's a big leap in the early days. So
Yeah.
the most important thing I started to do was to move towards validation. It was a big step. It's like, validate this voice. Oh, there it is. So we name it to tame it. So, oh,
Mm-hmm.
there's Crusher. All right. I noticed it. Is that a helpful or harmful thought? It's really harmful. Does it make me feel good or bad? Awful. Okay. So we know that it's running us. It's driving our bus. That's what the
Mm.
analogy I like to use. Who's
Yes.
driving your bus? Crusher's there leading the way. And what we want to do is start to understand, this is the interesting thing. So poor old Crusher
Mm-hmm.
is driven. What's his ultimate driver? It's fear.
Mm.
You may not like me if I don't show up in a particular way. You may not accept me if I
Mm.
don't show up in a particular way. You may not let me be part of the club if I don't show up in a particular way. This is all basic survival stuff in a primitive brain.
Mm.
If I don't belong to the tribe, I'm dead. I'm
Mm.
out in the savannah, I'm gone. I will
Yeah.
not survive long. I
Mm.
need the clan. So this is all hardwired. It's not our fault. We don't need to beat ourselves up about having this judgment. We may have had lots of external influence as well. There's depth to that. And we do need to look at those wounds. You talk about the inner child. There's lots of layers to that. I just
Mm.
talk about really, well, there's a wound here. I'm afraid if people don't like me, if I'm not pretty enough or clever enough or whatever the group needs for me to belong,
Mm.
then this critic's trying to keep me safe so that I don't experience rejection.
Mm.
Now, if that rejection happens and we're outed, then it can get really, really loud. What we then need to do is turn it around and actually say, hey, Crusher, it's okay.
Mm.
We're safe.
Mm.
We're okay. We don't need to belong to that group. There are lots of other groups. Actually, I'm all right just as I am. That's a very big leap. That's a lot of practice to get to there if you've had a mean inner critic.
Mm.
But that's ultimately the mindset shift. Can I recognize this is fear-based thinking? This is fear-driven. We know that when we are afraid, we're more likely to isolate, which is why when we have a strong inner critic, we have a propensity to depression because we isolate ourselves. We'll then go and hide and then we ruminate and it's really painful.
Yeah.
And then we focus on those wounds and then they amplify and so on and so forth. So we have that really downward negative cycle.
Yeah.
If we bring in compassion, if we say, oh, oh, this hurts, this is hard. Hey, I can see why you're scared. Anyone in your shoes, they'd feel scared too.
Yeah.
We soften around the edges of that fear-driven behavior or thinking, and then we start to respond differently, kindly, not with a stick saying, just pull yourself together.
That's great, Kathryn. Thank you for, I think that's a really helpful way to look at that. My question for people that are listening in that can identify with everything you're speaking about, I do that all the time. I do this. So that shift from being self-critical to being self-compassionate, um, how much of that can they do themselves versus do people that think they may need to actual, interventions and actually, how much they can do them themselves versus with do they need actual, support? What would you guide people to?
So there's different levels of, how painful and destructive is this voice? Now, some people are very dismissive and say, it's just trying to motivate me. It's not that bad. I would still invite a real deep dive, a look. Definitely do the training. But what I've been doing over the last 10 years is looking at how can we access this, make it really accessible in everyday life, so that we don't have to be a Buddhist monk, and we don't have to be an academic to really be able to get the benefits of self-compassion practice.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, there's really simple techniques. Activate the mammalian caregiving system, to begin choosing different thoughts in our head, to recognize tone and to change it. A lot of what I teach is incredibly simple.
Good.
So simple that you think, it's not going to make any difference. Stupid. And that was my reaction, Patrick. It's like, really? Is this it? Treat yourself like you would a friend? Come on.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I wonder that's a good way.
Yes, very easy.
Perfect. Well, I wonder that's a good way to wrap up this conversation, Kathryn, because I think what I'd love to do in the next discussion is to really talk about those simple everyday practices that we can use. So I think from this discussion, really helpful to have gone over, who and what this critic is, why it exists, where it comes from. And again, we'll talk in the next conversation about how to talk to crusher or your crusher in a more self-compassionate way. But thank you, Kathryn, for this discussion, and see you in the next.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Kathryn.